This day in sports history. This episode is brought to you by Stirling Roastery. For several months you've heard me talking about the great products and scents offered by the Stirling Soap Company. And while there may not seem to be any correlation between soap and coffee, what is similar is the same care and attention to detail in delivering great products to their customers. Stirling Roastery will ship great-tasting beans or ground coffee, for whatever coffee-making process you prefer, right to your door. I gave their breakfast blend a try recently, and I can tell you, it was a great way to get my day kick-started with this smooth, medium blend. And just like their soaps, they have a variety to choose from. Give Stirling Roastery a try at stirlingsoap.com. Well, hey there, and welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History. I'm Steve White, your host. This Day in Sports History is a member of the Sports History Network, and you can find more great podcasts and a whole lot more sports history info at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's September 3rd, and on this day in 1989, it was one of the strangest endings to a soccer match, and it involved a future Playboy model, a firecracker, and a hidden razor blade. This was a World Cup qualifying match between Chile and Brazil. The winner would advance to the 1990 World Cup in Italy. The loser would stay home. So there was a lot on the line in this one, to say the least. Now, this was a two-leg series as well. The first game in Santiago, Chile, ended up in a 1-1 draw, but the story of that match was what happened before the game when Brazilian great Romario got into a battle of words with Chile's coach Orlando Aravena. Romario was shown a yellow card before kickoff, and then shown a second yellow just 3 minutes in after an on-field fight. A Chilean newspaper wrote, "It was not a game, it was a war." So that was the first leg. This was Game 2 of that series, and it was played in Rio's Maracanã Stadium, and it was packed with 141,000 people. Careca gave Brazil a 1-0 lead at the end of the first half. Chilean goalkeeper Roberto Rojas had been trying to frustrate the Brazilian attack by delaying putting the ball back in play for goal kicks and then spending an excessive amount of time after making a stop or when the ball was played back to him. And it was annoying to not only the Brazilian players, but also to the partisan Brazilian crowd at Maracanã. In the 68th minute, after another prolonged delay for a goal kick, a flare launched out of the stands landed near Rojas. Rojas fell to the turf in apparent pain. Teammates swarmed around him. The smoke from the flare clouded what was happening. Team physios ran onto the field. It was a chaotic scene. When the smoke dissipated, blood could be seen streaming down Rojas's face. The match was stopped. Rojas was taken to the locker room, and it was believed that this flare had somehow damaged or injured Rojas and cut him in the face. Well, 3 hours passed as the Chilean contingent mounted a protest against Brazil for the match to be forfeited in their favor because of the disruption. But questions were being raised. The 200 photographers covering this match were asked if they'd gotten a picture of the moment that the flare had landed on the field. And one guy out of those 200, an Argentinian photographer, said that, yeah, he snapped his shutter in the moment. Of course, this is way before digital photography, and he needed to develop the photo before he'd actually know. But he was also hesitant to get involved. He was eventually coerced, though. Some said strong-armed for the photographic evidence, and a facility nearby was found to develop his film roll. When the picture came into focus, it showed the flare hitting the ground several yards behind Rojas, and so his back was to the flare. How was this cut above his eye? So the plot thickens. It was soon discovered that Rojas had hidden a razor blade in one of his goalie gloves. Now, not sure why it was there to begin with, but when the flare hit, he saw an opportunity to advance Chile to the World Cup. He intentionally slashed himself above the eye with his razor blade in the hope that the game would be called in favor of Chile. When that was discovered, the game was called, with Brazil given a 2-0 walkover victory, and they were given the spot in the 1990 World Cup. Rojas was given a lifetime ban. Chile not only was out of the 90 World Cup, but they were also excluded from attempting to qualify for the 1994 World Cup because of that incident. So, where does the Playboy model come in? Well, the fan who threw the flare that started all of this was 24-year-old Roastery Mello. She became a celebrity in Rio for being the thrower of the firework, and she turned her 15 minutes of fame into the cover of the November 1989 edition of the Brazilian edition of Playboy. This episode is brought to you by Firefly Books, and with you being a sports fan just like me, here's 2 suggestions for your next great sports read. If you love basketball, then you need to add Dave Zarum's book, NBA 75, The Definitive History. Uncover untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. From the league's humble beginnings to its modern glory, it is a courtside seat to 75 years of NBA history. And if you're a golf fanatic, then you gotta check out Matt Adams' book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget. I've used it as a reference in this podcast over the past year for lots of stories that I've done, and I can tell you from experiencing it, this is a great book. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. It's the closest you'll ever get to walking the fairways with the greatest to ever play the game. Grab your copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available from Firefly, wherever you get your books. On this day in 1977, Japan's Sadaharu Oh hit career homer number 756, passing Hank Aaron's total. Now, before you start yelling at whatever device you're listening to this podcast on, I get it. There is a huge difference between Japanese professional baseball and Major League Baseball. Sadaharu Oh said as much after hitting this home run, so I get it. But Japanese ballparks have smaller dimensions, and the pitching, obviously, not as good. The good Japanese pitchers tended to find their way to the States to play in the MLB, right? But the season is shorter, so just keep that in mind. So again on this day, in his 19th season, Oh hit career homer number 756. With a full count, Oh drilled a Yasumiro Suzuki pitch over the wall down the right field line in the 3rd inning. The game was being played in the Giants' home park, Korakuen Stadium, that had respectable distances of 396 to center, 361 in the alleys, but it was only 288 down the line where Oh hit his world record-breaking home run ball. The shortest porch in the majors is down the right field line at Fenway at 302. So, yeah, smaller field dimensions, but still, that's a lot of dingers, all right? So, as O rounded the bases, the 55,000 in attendance roared, streamers flew out of the stands, he was met at home plate by his teammates, and handed a giant baseball made of flowers. O would play another 3 years and go on to hit 896 home runs in his career. O admitted that the major leagues would have been much more difficult, and he would not have hit nearly as many home runs if he faced major league pitching in major league ballparks. He also held the single-season home run record of 55, and when foreign players started infiltrating the Japanese league, Japanese pitchers became very protective of O's single-season mark. When O managed the Giants after he retired from the game, there were 3 different instances when foreign players were a home run or 2 from the record, and the Japanese pitchers refused to throw strikes, purposefully throwing away from them. It was not until 2013 that O's record of 55 homers in a season was topped by Curaçao's Vladimir Valentin. On this day in 2008, it was the first official use of replay in Major League Baseball. The New York Yankees led 6-3 in the top of the 9th. They were playing Tampa at Tropicana Field, and with a man on and 2 outs, A-Rod hit an A-bomb down the left field line. It was ruled a home run on the field, but it was close enough where there was a little bit of doubt. Commissioner Bud Selig okayed the use of replay for certain calls on August 28, but it wasn't tested until Devil Rays manager Joe Madden requested the review of A-Rod's homer. The call was confirmed, and the Yankees went on to win the game 8-4. Now, I said this was the first official use of replay, but it wasn't the first time that replay had been used to confirm or reverse a call. Way back in 1999, umpire Frank Pulley used a dugout camera to look at a close call on whether a ball was a home run or a ground rule double. The play had been ruled a home run, but Pulley changed it to a ground rule double after taking a look at it. So after that incident, Selig decreed that replay could not be used until he made it official 9 years later. On this day in 1906, Nevada struck it rich with another moneymaker. Now, since 1859, Nevada has been a place people have gone to strike it rich. When the Comstock lode was discovered and more than $400 million worth of silver was unearthed, the state was admitted to the Union since, well, that kind of money could fund the Civil War effort. In 1900, another stretch of silver was uncovered, and then in 1904, gold was found. A town popped up nearby soon after, and it was called Goldfield. After a few years and people had flocked to the area and then moved on, the folks of Goldfield wanted to attract people to the areas for reasons other than gold. There were some interesting first thoughts that I'm sure were preceded by the phrase, "Hey, gentlemen, there are no bad ideas." Well, one enterprising shopkeeper in town suggested they build a big fountain in the middle of town that would be filled with beer every morning. Another, possibly after reading Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz, published 4 years earlier, suggested taking flight in a hot air balloon and dropping gold coins on the streets of Goldfield. It was Tex Rickard, a man who would later become the greatest boxing promoter of the early 20th century, who suggested that the town host a boxing match instead to draw thousands to the area. Now, that idea had some weight to it, and almost immediately a sports commission was formed. $50,000 was put forth to attract 2 top-notch fighters, and Rickard was put in charge of, well, pretty much doing all of the work. Rickard set his sights on Danish boxer Oscar Battling Matthew Nelson, who most people refer to simply as Bat, but fought under the name Battling Nelson. He was a little tough to get in touch with, though, and when contact was finally made, he had little interest in the early discussions. But he would come around to the idea eventually, after it became known that Joe Gans would be in the opposite corner, and that the durable Dane would be getting $23,000 to step into the ring, and Gans would only be getting $10,000. The fight drew the many thousands to the town that the organizers had hoped. An arena had been especially built for the fight, and more than 8,000 from all walks of life and classes meandered in to find seats. It was especially noted that there were 300 women in attendance for this fight. It was hot and dry in Goldfield, Nevada, as it tends to be in early September. As the town clock struck 3, Joe Gans entered the ring. And he was a little weary, though. He had been a few pounds over the weight limit the day before, and Nelson's fight manager had insisted that he drop those pounds before the fight or his man would not be getting in the ring. Nelson climbed in next. The ring was a bit smaller than typical as well. Nelson's team had insisted on the smaller dimensions because they thought their guy would have an advantage. Nelson was known to be a vicious puncher, a bit of a dirty fighter as well, and a guy with a granite jaw. He loved delivering body blows, especially kidney punches. And Gans was known as a more classical fighter. Boxing historians say that Gans was one of the best fighters pound for pound in the history of the sport. He had a record of 139-5 with 49 knockouts as he moved to the center of the ring as the bell to start the fight rang out. Gans controlled the first 10 rounds, putting his boxing skill on full display. But again, Nelson could take a punch, or a lot of them. In the 11th, Nelson resorted to his old tricks, gouging Gans in the eye, headbutting him, but it just didn't seem to have any effect. The fight carried on into the 42nd round, and an increasingly frustrated Nelson drilled Gans with a punch below the belt. Gans gasped, but he did not go down. The referee stepped in to issue a warning, but Nelson was not listening, and he delivered another direct shot to Gans' groin, and this time he crumpled. The referee stopped the fight, disqualified Nelson for the low blow, and awarded Gans the victory. So, more than likely, this fight is between 2 fighters that you probably haven't heard of. And I'll be honest, I didn't know about this fight either until I read about it in Burt Sugar's book, The Great Fights. But here's the thing. This fight was big. It was huge for a few reasons. But one of the biggest is that this was one of the first fights to be fought in Nevada. It was the start of Tex Rickard as a promoter, and he became a giant in the sport in the first half of the 20th century. Second, it led to more and more fights coming to the desert of Nevada. Kind of get where I'm going here? And it's considered to be the bedrock that boxing built on to one day rise up in Las Vegas as one of the great places to stage a world-class championship fight. But maybe, just maybe, the time has come to explore the idea of putting that beer fountain in the middle of the town square again. And on this day in 1970, the world said goodbye to Vince Lombardi, who died at the age of 57. Now, if you're a sports fan listening to my sports history podcast, you don't need me telling you that Lombardi won 105 games, including playoff wins in his 15 years as a head coach, or that he coached 5 NFL championship teams, including wins in the first 2 Super Bowls. What you may not know, though, is that Lombardi had been very proactive in normalizing an integrated locker room. There were a few black players on the Packers roster when he came to town, but he brought more in to fill key positions. In 1959, during his first training camp, a rumor began swirling about an interracial relationship between one of the players and a young lady. Lombardi made it clear that if a player showed any sign of prejudice, that player would be dismissed from the team. In 1970, a visit to the doctor in June revealed colon cancer. In late July, he was told it was inoperable and his situation was terminal. When he passed away a little after 7 in the morning on this day, he was surrounded by his wife, both of his parents, his 2 kids, and his 6 grandkids. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. During the Cold War, there was a planned CIA psyop to repackage extra-large condoms as medium and then drop them over parts of the Soviet Union. The idea was to demoralize the Russians into thinking that American men were well endowed. The plan was never put into action, though. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.